The City Council regular meeting for the City of Wyoming, Minnesota, July 5th, 2023. Let the record reflect, we do have a quorum. Member Luger, Member Onstad, Member Yeager, and Mayor Iverson are present. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, next on the agenda is open forum, is an opportunity for members of the public to address the City Council on items that are on or may not be on the current agenda. Items requiring council action may be deferred to staff or boards and commissions for research and future council agendas if appropriate. You will be limited to 3 minutes, and we ask that you conduct yourself in a professional, courteous manner and refrain from the use of profanity. Failure to abide by this policy may result in the loss of your privilege. We have 3 people that signed in. Does anybody wish to speak for open forum? No? We'll move on then. Number 1, approval of minutes. Consider approving the minutes of the regular meeting of the Wyoming, Minnesota City Council for July 20th, 2023. If there are no comments or questions, do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion to approve by Member Luker. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Member Onstad. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So approved. Number 2, consider approving the minutes of the work session meeting of the Wyoming, Minnesota City Council for June 27th, 2023. If there are no questions or issues, do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
We have a motion to approve by Member Luger. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Member Onstad. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So approved. Moving on to consent agenda. Number 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Does anybody wish to pull an item from the consent agenda? Seeing none, we need a motion to approve consent agenda number 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion to approve by Member Onstad. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Member Luger. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So approved. Acknowledge receipts of reports of officer, boards, commissions, and department heads, number 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. I wish to pull number 11. Is there anybody else who would like to pull a report? All right. Let's go ahead and approve 8, 9, 10, and 12, and we'll talk about 11 after that. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Member Luger. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Approved. Number 11, Mr. Erickson, just a quick question. I saw in there that Katie Glenn is on there, and it states that you're looking over some new documents that were sent over. I gotta get to it now, sorry. Let's see. If I can find it quickly.
I can probably
pull
answer
it?
the question. I think I understand what you're referring
Yeah,
to.
it
and
says
so,
staff is finalizing review of the recent submitted plans. Has there been other ones submitted since?
yeah, so it's pretty common that we get plans, we provide initial comments, and then they send plans back addressing our comments. And we've had some iterations where they haven't met or satisfied all of our comments, and so they're in a process of working through those, and we've just recently received another submittal with revised plans addressing some drainage questions that we had, and so they're hopefully resolve those, and we're just in the process of reviewing those now.
All right, great, thank you. That was my only question. So I'll move to approve number 11. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Member Onstad. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So approved. Number 13, the City of Wyoming completes step 3 in the Minnesota Green Step program. Mr. Linwood?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. This is just a communication to the council to make you aware that as our continued efforts as part of the Green Step a program through the state of Minnesota, it's essentially a comprehensive framework for sustainability efforts by the city and environmental friendly components and things that we have done as far as projects. It's a 5-step program for cities to work towards sustainability. Recently at the League of Minnesota Cities Conference in Duluth, A few weeks ago, the city received our Step 3 award, so we have now graduated up to that third achievement. So this is just the acknowledgement, the press release, and the certificate of achievement presented from the Minnesota Green Steps is the acknowledgement to the city's work in that. So it's just a communication.
Okay, and I see that there was only two of us, two cities, right,
Only-
that
only-
received step 3?
Yes, for Step 3, just us and Robbinsdale. So.
Yeah. Step 4 and 5 take a little bit more money and time.
Correct. Yeah, a lot more effort for those. So, but
All right. It was nice to receive that award at the League of Minnesota Cities, so. Okay, number 14, to consider resolution 230765, a resolution expressing support for the proposed use of tax increment financing for an affordable housing project by Reuter Walton Development LLC. Mr. Linwood, are you starting off?
I
with
will,
that?
Mayor, thank you. For both resolutions, 230765 and 230766, I'll address them now, but certainly if we have questions on either, I'm happy to answer those. And we'll have, the applicant is present, then we also have the city's financial consultant from Baker Tilly here, Mr. Denaway, for a brief presentation. But just for an overview, the City of Wyoming and Chisago County HRA EDA were approached by Reuter Walton for the early spring this year for a potential 72-unit affordable housing project just west of the Sunrise Trail. As part of that project, the developer is seeking a 9% housing tax credit that is through MHFA, and that's a competitive process that they will be potentially put an application in for based on the support from the city. It's part of that, there's some necessary items that they need for that application to receive from the city. One being is what is in front of you tonight is a resolution essentially indicating support for a project and the intent to use tax increment financing for a project. It is the intent, but doesn't necessarily, as we move forward, if the project were to be awarded with the MHFA tax credit that we would have to move forward, we'll still have an opportunity to go through that process of creating that TIF district. There's different statutory requirements as such a public hearing and a few others as far as a financial review for a but-for test. But that would be the first component of that. Currently, that TIF would be projected at $397,000 for up to a duration of 26 years. The second component tonight on this is to Resolution 230765. Excuse me, that has been that resolution that I just spoke of. That is essentially that support for the project and the application from Reuter Walton for the MHFA grant application, and then also for a letter of support from the city. The second resolution is 230766. That is a resolution supporting that the Chisago County HRA EDA Trust Fund has awarded a $200,000 loan at a 1% interest rate for the project at a duration of 20 years, and that being contingent on improvement from the City Council tonight. So at this point, we'll have an opportunity for the applicant, Mr. Jared Ackman from Reuter Walton, to give a brief summation of the project. I know the council has heard Mr. Ackman a few times before, but he'll just give a quick overview. From there, we'll have a brief presentation from Mr. Denaway from Baker Tilly.
Okay. You can come to council anytime you want. So, good to see you again.
Hello. Better. All right. As Rob alluded to, I don't need to regurgitate much of what we said, but as just maybe a brief summary of kind of what we're proposing. Across the street, it would be a 72-unit, 3-story project with 1-story underground parking and then inclusion of surface parking. And that would result in about 2.5 stalls per unit, not currently proposing to charge for parking. And that would be a combination of 100% of the units at or below 60% AMI, a mix of 30s, 50s, and 60s is currently outlaid at Thanks Rob. So this is a good snapshot running east to west along the Sunrise, just behind us here. As Rob mentioned, our goal and hope working with the landowners is to apply at MHFA. That deadline is next Thursday, the 13th. And then from there, it's a competitive application. They make those announcements towards the end of the year, around Christmas time. So it's kind of a waiting game from there. And then all things considered, the best outcome would be closed sometime next fall. But we think with how we've structured our project and with the support of the city and possibly county and the additional state funding that we received, the state received earlier this spring, we're optimistic of the project. Happy to answer any specific questions of the project at this time.
Okay.
Or
Yeah, we can, so council, we did have a long work session regarding this, so I'm gonna ask that we keep our questions to what were not answered, or new questions from after the work session that we had. So I'll start with Member Luker.
I actually did not attend the work session. I was not in town, so I will defer to, I read through the obviously the work session minutes and have some questions, but I will right now defer to everyone else.
Okay, sounds great. Member Onstad?
No questions.
All right, Member Yeager?
None for Mr. Ackman.
Okay, all right. Do we want to vote on both at the same time, or do you want to go one at a time?
I'd like to have Mr. Dunaway talk about the project real quickly with his presentation, if that's all right, and then if the
Yeah.
council has any
Yeah.
further questions, and then from there, we would go to review the
Okay.
resolutions.
Okay, and council, please note that I will do roll call on both of these. All right, thank you.
thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, so we're gonna have a presentation from Mr. Dunway.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Linwood. Mayor, members of the City Council, Tom Denaway with Baker Tilly Municipal Advisors. So I believe in the packet, the same presentation was provided was provided at the work session. I'm just going to try to hit some of the highlights of this. I don't think we need to belabor this again after having gone through everything pretty thoroughly at the work session last week. So Rob, if you just want to jump to the next slide. So just as a reminder, TIF is a method of capturing the future tax base growth resulting from the new development. Property will still pay its full property tax based on its full market value. It's where the taxes go after they are collected by the county that is different. Instead of being redistributed to the taxing jurisdictions, the incremental growth in the property taxes applicable to that site get redirected to the city as tax increment revenue. And then based on the terms of any obligation the city has entered into, they get used to either pay off a city obligation if they had it, or reimburse a developer on a pay-as-you-go basis, which is what's proposed here, would be the developer incurring TIF-eligible costs up front and then being reimbursed over time from the future tax increment revenue. So the goal of tax increment is to make projects that would not otherwise be feasible. So it's what's referred to as the but-for test. So the idea is that we're only using tax increment incentives to make projects feasible that would not have otherwise occurred but for the use of that tax increment revenue. There's varying types of TIF districts. What's being considered here as a housing district, the qualification for the creation of a housing district is the generation of low and moderate income housing units with certain thresholds of requirement needing to be met in order to be eligible for the use of tax increment. For affordable housing TIF districts, the qualification is either 20% of the units at 50% AMI or 40% of the units restricted at 60% AMI levels. Obviously, with a tax credit project such as this, the project is more than likely to meet the TIF qualification criteria as it relates to affordable housing projects. Affordable housing districts are able to be in place for a period of 25 years from the first receipt of increment. All the TIF language and durations are based off of from the first receipt. So it's that number of years plus one is effectively the total duration of the district. So these are the types of things that we can fund with tax increment financing. A lot of what we refer to as ground and down type improvements. The important thing when we refer to public improvements is there has to be a nexus between the need for the public improvements and the project. We can't create a TIF district to fund a new intersection or street light on the other side of town. There's got to be a direct correlation there. These are the types of public improvements. Rob, you can jump to the next slide. These are the types of things that we talk about as public improvements that are eligible. The next slide is things that are not eligible. Rob, you can jump to the next. Those are things like public buildings, culture and recreation, parks. And then the city is able to retain up to 10% of the increment for administrative costs associated with administering the district. It's proposed with this project that the city would retain that 10%. The use of those funds does have to be directly specific to the administration of the district. We can't just take that 10% and dump it in the general fund. We have to document and keep records of what those costs were incurred for. But beyond that, the city does intend to retain 10% of the increment for that purpose. So we went through this in pretty great detail last time. The main thing to point out here is Minnesota, we have that two-step process for property taxes. We convert from a market value to a tax capacity. The big change in the legislative session recently was the rate at which we convert market value for affordable housing to tax capacity. That amount was reduced significantly from what it was before, which reduces the overall amount of property tax burden incurred by property within by affordable housing property. So the goal of the legislative change was to help reduce that property tax burden. The use of tax increment financing to help assist this project would reduce that further. So as you can see here, the total amount of TIF eligible property taxes that would be generated by the site post-development based on the estimated market value provided by the county appraiser is a little more than $37,000. It's worth noting that the total property tax estimate for the site upon completion is a little more than $53,000 at $53,784. So only a portion of the property taxes paid by the site are actually eligible to be captured by TIF. And then you can jump to the next one. Kind of similar chart here. The important thing that this is pointing out is that the original market value that's assigned to the site is maintained, and taxes applicable to that market value as converted for the use of the property, in this case, converted to affordable housing, the 4D tax or class rate. That market value is maintained, and the taxes applicable to that are maintained and continue to flow to each of the taxing jurisdictions. It's the growth in that kind of yellow amount is what gets captured as tax increment over time. Rob, you want to jump to the next one? So this is kind of what summarization, what the duration of a district might look like. So the kind of chartreuse color at the bottom there, teal, whatever that is called, is the amount that stays going to the existing taxing jurisdictions during the duration of the TIF district. The incremental growth in taxes, the gray portion is what gets captured over the period or duration of the TIF district and gets used to reimburse the developer for costs incurred. And then at the end of the duration of the tax increment district is where we have the yellow. All that new market value becomes new property tax base for all the taxing jurisdictions to benefit from. So as I mentioned, with tax increment financing, there's two ways to do it. It's a future source of revenue, so we have to bridge that gap between incurring costs now and having a revenue that's going to come in over time. So there's two ways to do that. One is the lower option on there, which is the city can issue debt, tax increment bonds, and use the tax increment revenue to pay yourselves back or pay the debt service on that bonds. What we try to do in most cases is what's referred to as pay-as-you-go. So the developer is responsible for incurring the cost today. They have to fund the project, they have to incur the TIF eligible cost, and then they get reimbursed over time from future tax increment revenue. So because they're incurring a cost today and the revenue is not going to be coming in over time, they are likely to incur financing costs associated with that because they're either going to have to fund it out of pocket or borrow to fund that cost. So when we talk about tax increment financing assistance, we're typically referring to it in the principal value of the assistance, and that it's going to be reimbursed that principal amount plus an interest carrying cost. And we can talk about what the interest component is on this in a little bit, but that's why we do that, because we have a future source of revenue, but a cost that's being incurred today. So what we do is we reimburse the developer at the interest rate that they're borrowing at or anticipated to borrow at. We don't want to reimburse them at 7% interest rate and have them borrowing at 5% and making money off of that. We just try to keep that cost neutral to them. So the impact of TIF is it does redirect the future tax dollars, but it does it to meet a defined public purpose. It assists projects that would not otherwise occur, which is the but-for test, and ultimately at the end of the TIF district, it adds that new tax base, resulting in a long-term investment. So as Rob mentioned, this is part of the tax credit process, so it's a competitive process. Submittals are due in July, so next week, as Jared had mentioned. So the announcement of tax credit awards is typically made in October. It used to be made in October, now it seems to be going even later. So what the developer is seeking right now is preliminary support from the city as part of the application process. So I think Rob and Jared covered that both pretty well. Again, this is a definition of affordable housing. I think we went through that pretty closely during the work session. Again, a little more on the proposal. Rob, if you want to jump to the next slide. One more. Again, another another breakdown of the types of units and the size. 31% of the units will be at 30% area median income, but the majority of the site will be at either 50% AMI or 60% AMI requirements. And then you can see also the breakdown of bedroom units as well. A significant number of bedroom sizes or unit sizes above 2 bedrooms, which is obviously beneficial for providing housing opportunities for families. These are the proposed rents. I think this has been provided to you in a number of circumstances or instances. You can see the breakdown in the average monthly gross rents by each of the projects and based on the varying income requirements. You can see that even though certain income requirements are required to be hit, that the rents still become fairly significant depending on the unit size, even when meeting those area median income thresholds. So finally, just to the TIF assistance. So as mentioned, this is part of a competitive process. One of the things that applicants to MHFA get scored upon is their local contribution. So by providing the letter of support and adopting the resolution, that would enable the developer to receive the benefit of that pointing as part of their competitive process with MHFA. And then also it is necessary from a feasibility standpoint for affordable housing projects. Obviously, affordable housing projects, they have the availability of tax credits, but they usually need other sources of funding as well to make them feasible. So we did do a preliminary review of the financial feasibility of the project and did find that the use of tax increment would be warranted on that. So both of those are reasons why this project would meet the but-for. And then if the project was successfully awarded tax credits, we would do a more further analysis and provide greater detail as it relates to that but-for finding as part of the TIF district creation process that Mr. Linwood had mentioned, as there's a whole statutory process involved in that. So much more of that would come back in greater detail as to what that but-for finding is. And then finally, the preliminary assistance estimate is $397,400. Again, it's on a pay-as-you-go basis. That amount is based off of a 6% interest assumption, and it would be payable from 90% of the annually generated increment. The beauty of pay-as-you-go is if the tax increment revenue comes in lower, the city has no obligation to make the developer whole. The developer is only obligated to receive 90% of the increment that's generated up until the point that they have been reimbursed the principal and interest amount. If the increment comes in faster, they'll get repaid faster and the interest amount would be less and the district would be decertified early and the city would realize that benefit early. So while we have set the proposed repayment term at up to 26 years, when we based the assistance amount and we ran the TIF projections, we did not assume any market value inflation. Our goal is that by doing that, we have hedged and had a conservative set of TIF revenue assumptions. If inflation occurs, that TIF revenue would come in faster and that amount would get repaid faster. So it would take only about a 1.66% level of inflation for that 26-year term to actually get dropped to about 20 years. So by not including any inflation when we set that and we determine that amount, we've created a hedge that ideally will result in the district being paid off earlier than projected and hopefully less than the 26 years that it's proposed for. So the goal of that is to be conservative with our revenue projections and ultimately have this decertify earlier by having property tax market value inflation that occurs at a rate of approximately 1.6% or more. If that occurs, this will pay off in 20 years or less. So trying to be conservative and provide that benefit and have this be a much shorter duration than is actually shown here based on the way we structure the deal and the assistance amount. So with that, I will basically turn it over for questions. So as mentioned, it's 10%. The city would retain 10% for administrative expenses, and then all the amounts here are really preliminary. Ultimately, this TIF district the process would start creating next year. So the actual TIF amounts would be based off of paid 2024 tax rates. So the amounts are likely to change slightly depending on where that tax rate comes in. But the main deal points of duration, sharing ratio, and the like would be kept consistent with this.
All right, thank you. I'm going to start, first of all, we did spend about an hour and a half on this last week, so lots of good questions.
My apologies.
No, it's all good. It can be a little complicated, even though this is the third time I think it's come to us to do this. Just a quick question that I have on a slide. It showed 25 years tax increment funding on one slide, And then this says 26 years, and I believe, Mr. Linwood, you said 20 years. So I'm kind of wanted to put that all together.
And I think, so statutorily, and I can let Mr. Dunaway talk about this too, so statutorily, it says it's 25 years, but it's your first actual repayment for the
Yeah,
TIF. It can be.
the language is written in the statute of 25 years from the first receipt of increment is the way it's described, so it's 26 total years.
Okay.
It tends to get shorthanded in most of these to 25, but it's actually, it would be 26 total years.
Okay.
And I believe the 20 years that Rob was referencing was the term of the proposed county low insurance
County loan,
loan. I believe
Got
it was
it.
a 20-year duration.
That's right, the county put in money, that's right. Okay, perfect, that's all my questions. Again, council, I just want to remind you, we had an hour and a half work session on this, except for Member Luker, who might have a few more questions because she was not able to attend. So I'm going to start with Member Yeager.
Okay. Is there any possibility of getting that TIF down to a duration of 10 years or so?
To be honest, I don't know if I could answer that off the top of my head. It would really need to be a negotiation between the city and the developer as to what a workable maximum duration of the district could be. So I don't think it's something that I would be able to comment on the feasibility of that right now without having had that further conversation.
And what additional costs will the city incur once the building is built and occupied? I mean, departmental needs, staffing needs, facility needs.
I think at this
Equipment
point,
needs.
we're at a point right now where we're just putting an application in for the building through tax credits, potentially with that type of development. I mean, there's different things. Well, the city will receive a great amount in regards to sack and whack fees, to development permit fees. In regards to staffing, there'll be obviously on resources. There's components with our public works department. There's probably emergency services, police, but I think that's with any subdivision that
Yeah.
comes in, market rate apartment, affordable apartment, that's pretty much the same.
I was wondering if you just ran any numbers on that.
No, we've not.
Now, the land's zone commercial, people are gonna be asking about it. So can you explain why we don't need to rezone this land?
It's actually, it's central, it's guided for central business district, and then in that district, motels and hotels are under a conditional use, and apartment buildings would fall into the same, and that is also located within that shoreland district. In that shoreland district, you can do planned unit developments, which would also fall under that conditional use permit. So as our existing ordinances are written, it would be allowable. Even after the project, if the council wasn't comfortable with that, the ordinances could be reviewed or rewritten, so it is. But as I reviewed it and our zoning administrator, Mr. Weck, has reviewed it, we're comfortable that it meets all the criteria as when we first met with Mr. Ackerman, if that was a usable site for this type of project.
Okay, cool. Now, I just want to say, I have supported similar projects in 2019 and 2020. And on resolution 230766, I can totally support findings 1, 3, and 4. But I'm having trouble supporting finding number 2, the TIF district, for the following reasons. First, the building would be taxed at a much lower class when the legislator lowered it to 0.25. It used to be, at least 0.75. My house is the class of 1.0. I would think that would make it easier to finance this project privately rather than relying on a TIF or a governmental taxpayer assistance. Also, given the much lower class rate, 26 years to me seems to be a long time to wait to receive the additional taxes for the improvements. I mean, I did the math, I'd be like way in my 90s by then. It's a very long time. And when I went to the last budget meeting and I hear what the city needs, I don't know if we have to take that into consideration, and I don't know if giving up that increment for 26 years or even 20 years is a really good idea.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
No, that was it.
I think council, this one thing too, is just a couple comments to that. I think for this increment, based on the new statutes, the 397,000, Last time you saw these types of projects before you, were looking at increments of almost $1 million. So you're looking at a significantly less amount of increment over the duration of the project. I think the other thing is when we look at projects like this, the city council has identified as your goals is housing stock variation and workforce housing to be able to support individuals that are in our industrial parks. So I think that was the other component. The council outlined this as a goal, but certainly there are some things for consideration in the TIF, and this is again preliminary support. So if this were to receive tax credit, excuse me, for the 9%, when we went through that actual creation of that TIF, we could have greater detail, and like as Mr. Denaway said, there'd be greater review of the financials for the potential project.
But once you say you intended to do the TIF, with all the emails that were flying back and forth, aren't we committed?
Once again, we are not committed. The resolution is written by our bond counsel to ensure that the city is not open to liability if there would be a change out within the people on the city council, or if there was something about the project that the city didn't like. So the resolution is written in a way to protect the city from liability.
Oh, I totally get that, but it sounded like there was no, it's never been done, it's never happened. It's not happened in your career, Mr. Dunaway, according to the emails, so that's why I was just,
As far as, I guess I'm not following.
the email threads we had where I was asking, yeah, no, it's all me. I was asking what happens if we say we intend to get a TIF, Mr. Ackman gets his housing tax credits, and then we exercise the part in the resolution that says we don't have to grant it.
Well, and I think, as we talked about in that, as Mr. Ackman said, it might impact how the scoring is based on their project for the actual
Right.
project if it were to move forward. Otherwise, the city would have options if it determined it didn't want to proceed with the project. MHFA might review a different project or simply not award for that potential year. So there is, this isn't anything, like I said, this is preliminary intent, is all this is.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Member Onstad.
No questions.
All right, Member Luker.
I have a couple questions, and I apologize in advance if these were covered at the work session. I think, I appreciate staff and like the thorough presentation and the minutes. I just have a couple of questions that may or may not have been addressed that I am not reading. My first question, I guess, is there's a reference in the council minutes or the work session minutes regarding how this interacts with school district and county. And I'm just wondering, can I just get a quick elaboration on that, just a little bit more?
Mr. Dunaway, if you want to go through the tax implication, how that impacts for the.
And it doesn't have to be so.
No, no worries. So I think the point I was making at the work session is tax increment revenue is generated based off of the cumulative local tax rate applicable to the city, the county, and the school district, as well as some of the smaller like watershed type districts. The school district also collects a portion of their taxes outside of the tax capacity based taxes. There's also the referendum market value based taxes. And so the point I was making during the work session is that the referendum market value based taxes aren't captured by TIF. So when I talked earlier about the amount that was potentially available for tax increment revenue versus the total property tax that would be paid by the property, there's a significant difference in that of almost $18,000 or $16,000. And that's a big portion of that is the amount that would go to the school district via the referendum market value based taxes. So while the school district wouldn't benefit fully from the property being within a tax increment district, they still would realize a significant benefit of almost $16,600 annually from the new project coming online if it were to be created and awarded the tax credits and all that. So there is an immediate benefit to the school district as a result of this.
Awesome, thank you. I'm just wondering also so I know Member Yeager had asked about dropping the length of time to 10 years. And I'm just wondering if, even within the new numbers statutorily, is there any precedent for going from, on a housing project, going from 25 years and dropping it any amount of time, like to 20 or 10 years? And if so, how successful has that been in similarly, like, peer-sized cities?
Generally speaking, with housing districts, particularly on non-tax credit housing districts, most cities tend to err towards the longer duration because when you're doing a affordable housing tax increment district without the use of tax credits, the developer is obligated to maintain the affordable units for the period of the TIF district. So in most cases, cities are actually aiming for longer durations of the TIF district in order to maintain the longer provision of those affordable units. In the case of a tax credit project, they have to maintain the tax credits and the affordable units for that same duration anyway, so there's not a benefit being gained there, but if we're talking about comparison to what other communities have done, they usually try to actually err towards the longer term, maybe not always up to 26 years. And we're effectively here, we're trying, while the duration is up to 26 years, we've sized the dollar amount in a way that's likely to actually be much closer to 20 years, depending on the way inflation actually, what level of inflation occurs. So we've left some flexibility on duration, but we've set the budget amount that's being proposed as in a manner that would be more likely to be funded over a 20-year period, to try to kind of split the middle, provide some flexibility, will also provide the city with the best return and hopefully the shortest duration possible by not accounting for any inflation when we set that number.
Okay, thank you. Last question, and thank you all for bearing with me. How does the city's investment in this, how ultimately financially, how does this impact the rest of our projects, whether it's like in the future or current road projects, things like that, like just kind of in terms of bonding? And I know this is a pay-as-you-go project, but I guess broadly speaking, how does it impact us?
So really no large effect, and Mr. Denaway, feel free to jump in, but really on it doesn't really apply to our debt ratio or anything like that when we go
Correct.
through audit or we go through a bond rating through Moody's. So
Yep.
essentially just the taxes are being paid from that property to the county, and then essentially it's redistributed by the different taxing authorities to the actual TIF for the project. So it really doesn't have any, it's as Mr. Denaway said, I think that right now the land is being taxed, I think at $500 and $600 a year. So really there is no, we're gaining something in regards to we'll receive all the permit fees, everything for the building, and then I guess meet a potential goal of the city for workforce housing, a diversified housing stock, and then really not having anything that's gonna affect us budgetarily or within our debt ratios or anything financially that's gonna negatively impact.
Awesome, okay, thank you, that's all I had.
Perfect. Okay, I just have a few statements. So, from questions that were asked. Workforce housing, and when I think about workforce housing, I think about Rosenbauer, people at the hospital that are more CNAs or certified nursing assistants, maintenance, some of those jobs that are about $20 to $30 an hour. So when you calculate that out for a whole year, for $20 an hour, it's $41,600. $25 an hour, an employee would make $52,000, and for $30 an hour, they'd make $62,400. I honestly don't know at that 20 to 25 range, and I think, Mr. Linwood, we're gonna, if we pass this in support, we're also gonna look at the EDA and just kind of figure out what people are making, correct? And we might already have that. I think they've done a workforce housing study.
I think the HRADA has some salaries for their labor study, that they have some of that information in regards to a lot of the manufacturers and some of that median level of pay for Chisago County, and I think even drilling down into the city of Wyoming as well.
Perfect. So when I look at these numbers, when I think $41,600, and we've got some wonderful companies here. I mean, when we're talking Rosenbauer and we're talking Regal Machine and the hospital, and I could name a whole bunch, having these employees stay here within their community and able to walk to work, able to go to Split Rocks, able to go to the new dentist down here, they're counted as rooftops. So when we talk about having a place where our employees that don't make a lot of money are able to stay here in the community, it impacts our community in a positive way. They look at it's an impact on our restaurants, our businesses, and rooftops, because we start looking very nice to restaurants, fast food restaurants, that sort of thing. So it will bring in some more of those businesses. And it also helps for hiring for our workforce as well, to know that we have affordable housing for their employees to reside here. So I just wanted to point that out, why it's super important to have that. I also think that Mr. Dunaway pointing out the 26 years and the inflation dropping to 20 years or less at that 1.66, I think every single one of us that live in Chisago County has seen the price of our houses go up a lot. 21% was the last time. So when you say that 1.66, I can honestly see how that's going to drop even sooner. I also like the fact that the Reuters Walton that would be taking on this project also has to manage this building and properly manage it for up to 26 years or whatever that is, and they have a great reputation. So this fills a need within our community that we do not have and that we've been trying to get here. It also, there's a property out there that we haven't been able to get anything on there, that we've worked really hard to try to bring some businesses in, and this is a real plus to be able to have this kind of housing for our workforce housing to come in. So, yeah, that's all I have to say with that. So, do we have any other tips? We have one other one, right? And that's a 30-year?
That was a full duration of 26 years, so that's TIF 3.1, and that will be done, I believe, in 2026, and that's
Okay.
the East Viking Commons TIF.
Okay, great. All right, so that's all the questions I have.
Can I ask one more question? We talk AMI. What is the AMI? I know what it means. What is the number?
For Chisago County,
Yeah,
around 89,000, I believe,
okay.
is your
thank
average
you.
median income.
All right, so I remind council again, we are gonna do roll call of 14 and 15. I'm gonna read 14 first. To consider resolution 230765, a resolution expressing support for the proposed use of tax increment financing for an affordable housing project. Roll call, please. Member Luger.
Aye, but I think we might need a motion first.
Oh, I need a motion first, sorry.
I'll move.
You're right.
So moved.
I'm still trying to be perfect. Okay, so we have motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Member Onstad. Okay, roll call now. Member
Aye.
Member Onstad.
Aye.
Member Yeager?
Nay.
And Mayor Iverson is an aye. It does pass. Number 15, to consider resolution 230766, a resolution regarding the support of a housing trust fund application in connection with Reuter Walton Development LLC. I'll make that first. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Member Luger. Roll call, please. Member Yeager.
Nay.
Member Onstad.
Aye.
Member Luger.
Aye.
And Mayor Iverson is an aye. That does pass. I appreciate all the time that we have taken on this and you coming to our city a couple times to talk to us about it. It's very complicated. All right, number 16, as we move along, to consider a construction cost sharing agreement between the City of Wyoming and Mid-Continent Communications. Mr. Linwood, this is actually very exciting for many residents.
This is an exciting
Yeah.
one, and I apologize here, I'm just, my laptop will unfreeze.
I was having the same problem.
Bring this up. I can start though. At a previous council meeting, which I don't have directly in front of me, but I will momentarily here, we brought forward to the council a project that we had developed with the help of Mid-Continent. Thank you, Mr. Larson.
Good job.
Yeah, this is great. A little background on this. So the Chisago County Board of Commissioners designated approximately $2 million for ARPA funds for fiber grant opportunities within the county. The city had worked with Mid-Continent on potential projects, and one that was identified was a area on the Highway 8 corridor, mostly at this point resulting to mostly households, but also as now that the Highway 8 has been fully funded by the state legislature, you'll see that being completely developed, and really to put that fiber line in that corridor is going to be a great opportunity for development along it, as that's our land use plan guides that for mostly commercial along that Highway 8 corridor. So exciting to get that fiber in there, but what we had asked of the Chisago County Board of Commissioners was a funding mechanism for that. So the total project cost was approximately $166,000, with Mid-Continent putting in $99,000. We had requested from the Chisago County Board of Commissioners for the ARPA fund grant of $60,300, so that's 30% cost of the project, and then the city would do a 10% contribution of $6,700. I'm happy to say that at their, I believe, June 7th, 2023 board meeting, the Chisago County Board of Commissioners did approve our application for that grant. So the project will be fully funded. The only thing left is to approve a cost-sharing agreement between the City of Wyoming and Mid-Continent. We have already received a check from Chisago County for the $60,300. So that is in our account, and we are requesting that we approve this cost-sharing agreement. The $6,700 for the portion for the city will be utilized out of our existing ARPA funds.
Thank you. My only question with that is, do we know about how many people will not have broadband then? It's not a whole, because there were some that were really far out.
That was a big area that there was that was a portion that was underserved on that Highway 8. There are still some areas, I know that we've worked with Mid-Continent, they've just done some on Wyoming Trail that they are doing on their own through RDOF that they are not asking for assistance for, so that's fantastic. There is still a component through the city on the northern side of the city that still is not completely, I guess what the guidelines are for quote-unquote fiber connectivity and those speeds. But we are in a much better position than most of the county. There's a lot of portions of the county that do not have very good fiber, which is detrimental for people who may work at home, for kids that have to do homework and you don't need to utilize and access internet. So we still have a little ways to go, but we're in a much better place, and this is a really nice project to, like I said, help those residents along the corridor and then open it up for redevelopment.
Okay. And I know I appreciate the county commissioners for looking at our grant, and that's wonderful. So, questions? Member Yeager?
Oh, none. It's great.
Member Onstad?
No questions.
Member Luger?
No questions.
And I'm done with my questions, so we need a motion to approve the construction cost-sharing agreement between the City of Wyoming and Mid-Continent Communications.
So moved.
A motion to approve by Member Onstad. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Member Luger. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So approved. Number 17, last on our agenda, to consider entering a closed session under Minnesota State Statute 13D-05. What we're going to do is we'll take a 5-minute recess, but we will do council reports before we go into that. So we'll start with Member Luger.
I attended the groundbreaking ceremony at Railroad Park, which was great. We had a great little crowd. And I also attended the sewer commission meeting last week.
Okay, thank you,
Thank you for coming.
Member Onstad.
I attended the groundbreaking and the work session last week.
All right, thank you. Member Yeager.
I attended the work session, and thank you all for coming, and thank you all for watching.
All right. I attended the Joint Sewer Commission. I also attended the Veterans Memorial groundbreaking session. Mr. Linwood, help me with the title of this, the Chisago County EDA HRA Joint
Economic
Summit?
Summit.
Yep, so I attended that. I also attended the work session, and I was also at the League of Minnesota Cities Conference, which was amazing. It was 3 days. Yes, I do take my own vacation day to go because it is just an incredible learning experience. I would also like to thank the Wyoming Fire Department and the mutual aid that came into the neighborhood and put out a really large fire, and they did a great job. So really want to pass along my thanks to them. We have the best fire departments within the county, I think, overall. So that's all I have at this time. Again, thank you everybody for watching and coming tonight, and we are going to recess.